Hi everyone, I'm Alex Budrias, and this is Bannock and Tea Time presented by FNHPA, the podcast where we will be sitting down with First Nation housing professionals to get a little bit about their story, their experiences, and what they have seen and what they have worked towards. Today I have Lily Ann Mount Pleasant, who was the former youth representative on the board for FNHPA, and now she is the current financial controller. Thanks, Liliane, for joining me today. I'm very excited.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
So tell me, it's just a basic introduction since we don't really know you. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay. I'm Lily Mount Pleasant. I go by Lily. I am a Six Nations registered band member with Six Nations of the Grand River First Nation in Southern Ontario. As you mentioned, I'm formerly a youth board rep for FNHPA. I also simultaneously worked as a senior manager of housing for my First Nation, as well as a financial controller for the housing department at the First Nation. I also have a lot of experience in corporate finance within the community and outside of the community, a little bit of experience in retail banking, and I'm really excited to continue to be part of the conversation in relation to First Nations housing on a national level.
Okay, so I just want to know, honestly, how did you get into First Nation housing?
So as I said before, like my educational background is international business. And I specialized in finance. That was kind of my catalyst into housing. I joined housing as a financial controller. Prior to that, I was in retail banking. Thought that banking was a finance job. It's not. It's a sales job, especially retail banking is a sales job. It wasn't really what I wanted, so I did move into a finance assistant role as with a private company within my community, and had a lot of great experience there. And I had worked for my community prior to that in a finance assistant role for health services. Really loved my experience working for the community. And I always say to people, once you make a certain amount of money, because when you're younger, the jobs that you take are really driven by compensation. And that's just because of scarcity, right? You need to follow the money when you don't have enough of it. But once you get enough of it, it is not fulfilling. And so I was making enough in my role that I really started to question if it was something that I wanted to be doing, and what my next steps were going to be. And I felt a lot of fulfillment volunteering within my community, having worked within health services. So I saw an open position for a financial controller at the housing department. And decided to apply because it was a finance role. Knew very, very, very little about housing.
That's okay. We all start somewhere.
That's true. And I was lucky enough to get the job and really fell in love with it. And I think that's, from having conversations with the board, that's how a lot of people get into housing. Is they either come through another catalyst, whether it be maintenance or some sort of technical service. And we say you're a 6-monther or you're a lifer, because you either hate it because it's such a grind, there's so much work to be done in our communities, or you fall in love with it because when you give someone the keys to their home, or you give someone a rental unit that's trying to flee domestic violence, and that becomes a safe space for them and their children. There's such a fulfillment within it, and that doesn't mean that it's not hard, but there's such a fulfillment that exists within working within our communities in housing, that you want to stay.
For sure. And I always said, as First Nations people, when we work for the people, there's something so gratifying to the soul. So I could imagine making that pivot from RBC banking to First Nation housing. It must have really gave you like a meaning,
Yeah, you start to question at the bank. It was really like they would have announcements where you're like, oh, this quarter we made $11 billion.
And who's making this $11 billion?
You're not seeing the $11
That ain't your
billion.
money.
No, but when your sole purpose is to, especially in private enterprise, your sole purpose is to make someone else money. And there's a lot of challenges, and some people chase those challenges because they like the challenge.
Yeah.
And I was like that at first. I was very like, I need to figure this out. I love the drive that it gives me. But over time, you lose that ambition, and you lose that, you wonder what it's all for.
For sure.
And in housing, you never lose sight of what it's for, because there's so much need, right? You see the people that are coming into the department that don't have anywhere to live, or are sleeping on their mom's couch, or they're living in a situation of overcrowding. And you see every single day what you're doing it for. And it is sometimes heartbreaking that you can't do enough for everybody.
One step at a time, though.
But it is where you always have to keep in mind that we're going to get there someday. You know, we're going to, and the more work that we do at this level, at the national level, to raise awareness, to build capacity, the more fulfillment people working in our communities' housing departments are going to have, because they're going to be able to do more.
For sure.
So, yeah.
Lily, I got one final question.
Okay.
What is your dream, your number one dream for FNHPA moving forward? What do you hope for the organization?
Oh, that's a good question. What do I hope for?
It could be anything, small, big, even bigger.
Yeah.
It's just your dream. What do you see? What do you want?
Well, I think it's really, I really want to see that realization of the dream that the board had for regional expansion. You know, it's easy to sit at a table of a national organization, because we have a lot of people that have so much experience within housing. And you know, Roxanne, she's a founding board member, and she knows so many people in so many communities. So she has a really good basis to say, okay, this is what I'm seeing, and this is what we think people need and what people want, in terms of resources and things. But the reality is to be able to expand into the regions and have faces, FNHPA faces within these communities, and hearing feedback in what people need and the problems that they face, and then to be able to take that back to the national level and come up with solutions for communities, to help them do it themselves. And I think what people talk about is less reliance on federal funding, on federal decision making, more self-sufficiency within communities, even if they're not self-governing, to have the ability to say, okay, we're going to make this decision as a community, and we're not going to ask the feds for money, right? And it's to be able to build that capacity so our people feel empowered. I think we're going to see a lot of that come to fruition with the regional expansion, because people are going to have the support right in their communities, right? They don't have to reach out to us, to some person in Ontario that they don't really know, and they have to worry about a time difference, right? They're going to be able to go to Dustin, or they're going to be able to go to Candy or Jeremy and say, hey, here's my problem. Is there anything that FNHPA offers in terms of a resource or something,
Like support,
to offer that support to us? And it's having that familiar face, and we're seeing it now. You know, we've started the regional expansion, but to see that come to life really is the dream for me, because it's what I wish I had when I was at a manager within my own housing department. Is you really feel like sometimes a fish out of water, and you don't know what to do, and you almost need a network. But when you're young within a housing department, you haven't built your network yet.
No.
So who can you reach out to? Well, there's no one, right? But now there is, right? And that's my dream for FNHPA, and I see it already happening, and I'm so grateful as a former board member how quickly this kind of thing is happening.
Yep.
But I'm also so I'm so excited to see what's going to come of it when the other regions, kind of when we start rolling out the
Yeah.
other regions. So
To expand into even other regions.
yeah,
Well,
Ontario hasn't happened yet.
it's gonna
Ontario's
happen.
next. Yeah,
It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So I think your dream is not so far off from being accomplished to be realized.
One thing that's a misconception, I think, about housing, working within housing or potentially working within housing is that you already have to be working in housing to get into housing. And it's kind of like a chicken or the egg situation where you're like, okay, well, how do I get into housing if I don't have any experience in housing?
Yeah.
And I think the great thing about it and the great thing about how I got into housing is where are your transferable skills, right? Where is your expertise? Because there's so many different layers and the complexities to a housing department where you could have done almost any job before and there's something you bring to the table.
Yeah.
Even working in like retail, right? So much of what we do in housing is dealing with people, right? And dealing with people who are vulnerable. And so to be able to speak to people in a way that's, courteous and mindful and empathetic and compassionate is something that some of our departments really lack, right? And it's people that have been hardened over time. So I think bringing those people in that can have, genuine, open, kind conversations, even sometimes there's nothing we can do to help you, right? But just being kind and letting you know that you're heard and that we empathize with you goes a long way for people. And I think that those transferable skills, one thing I always said to my staff when I was recruiting was, I can teach you how to read a balance sheet. I can teach you how to run a computer system. I can teach you how to pre-approve someone for a mortgage. I can't teach you how to be a nice person.
The human parts.
That human aspect of it, those soft skills are so integral to our housing departments and making them function. And I don't think enough emphasis is placed on those. So I want people to be able to see, even from my own lived experience, that you don't have to be a housing expert or a housing professional to work in housing. There's almost always something you can bring to the table that makes you good for the job as long as you're passionate about what you do and you want to serve the people.
Good. So we're gonna go even further back because I took a look at your bio on our official website and it said that you studied abroad.
Yeah, I did. I didn't do a exchange, which I think is quite common. I did, especially in business, you typically do an exchange year, but I actually did my full degree abroad. So I went to a French university, but I studied for 2 years in London and I spent a year in Paris. And it was a great experience to leave my community and be able to see different cultures and have different experiences. It also kind of grew for me an appreciation of home and returning to my community with a lot of different experiences and a new outlook and expertise that I didn't have when I left.
I'm someone who doesn't like to travel, so when I hear that you went to London and Paris, I'm like nervous.
Yeah.
How was it? Like, did you learn a lot at the same time?
Yeah, I feel like there's maybe a misconception that people who do leave their communities aren't nervous and aren't afraid of it. I think it's a common feeling, especially because we know everyone in our communities, right? Our communities are quite small and most people in our communities we're related to in some way. But I feel like it is scary. But that's almost the fun of it, right? Is it's going to be a different experience. And I did experience a lot of culture shock when I left. I thought because I was going to an English-speaking country first that I wasn't going to have that. And because I was kind of like obsessed with One Direction at the time. So I was like happy, and I thought I was going to go to London and meet One Direction. I didn't. But I was really excited for the experience, but that didn't mean that I didn't miss home. And it didn't mean that I didn't have second thoughts when I went. I spent a lot of nights on the phone with my dad, him trying to just like convince me to stay there. And I'm glad that I did, because I think that, like I said, you grow an appreciation for your home and for your community by leaving it and having other experiences outside of it. And I think that it doesn't have to be as committed as going away for like 3 years to study, but I do think that it's nice to see how different cultures treat even housing, right? Like, having lived in a different country, you see how people appreciate and maintain their homes, and especially in London, they have their own housing crisis at the moment, where people literally just can't find a place to rent, or it costs a fortune, or there's all these barriers and loopholes they have to jump through, which is very similar to what's kind of facing Canada. Even outside of our communities, there's a national crisis in terms of housing. So they have a similar, but they have a much different approach, right? So having lived in those different experiences, you have a unique perspective that I think allows you to come up with unique solutions to things. And even though they don't translate in the same way, I do think that you are able to take things from someone else and kind of put your own spin on it. And I think that's what a lot of communities have done, and what FNHPA tries to give communities, right? When you talk about our national certification or our resources and toolkits, it's very standardized, because we do want a foundation for people to build off of. And I think that once you have those resources, the whole point, or what the board aimed for when developing these things, was that you can take these and put your own spin on them in your communities, because it's not going to work the same way for everybody. And so I do think that the more experiences that you have in going to different places, it doesn't have to be a different country. It can be a different community within even your own province. And you're going to have a little bit of culture shock, because you think, we're all First Nations. But everyone's a little bit different.
Well, yeah, you were mentioning culture shock even within our own communities. If like, I'm from Quebec, so if I go visit you in your province, it's not going to be the same necessarily. But my personal opinion is that being Native in Canada, it's a universal experience too. We hear a lot about housing crises in the community, but even outside communities, Native people are having a hard time finding rent where I'm from. There's a lot of racism and all of that. So it's a crisis everywhere, I would say. So before you became FNHPA's financial controller, as you mentioned, you were on the board as the youth representative. For our listeners who are new to the world of FNHPA, can you explain a little bit of what the youth rep does for us?
Yeah, I think obviously I was kind of the inaugural youth board rep, so I was the first one. The board really was like, we think we need some fresh takes on things, right? We want to have a youth representative because, the youth are our future, and that's really ingrained in our culture, right? Is to listen. The youth need a voice as well. And so they put a call out, I responded, was lucky enough that they saw value in my experience and my voice, and it was a great experience. But my take on it, because I know each person's going to be a little bit different. They come with their own experiences and their own agendas, and what they want to bring to the association. Mine was really based around getting youth not only involved in housing departments, but excited about jobs within a housing department. Because prior to me working at Six Nations Housing as a financial controller, I didn't know really the extent of what we did as a department. I knew that we had a non-reserve loan program so people could go into home ownership. I knew we had rental units. I didn't know that we offered commercial space. I didn't know anything about the CMHC grant programs.
And imagine if you didn't know that, there's a plethora of youth that probably don't know it either.
Right, and there's so many, there's a lot of scarcity within all First Nations housing departments. There's so much potential for, human resources, and building capacity within these departments is really about getting enough people doing the jobs so that they can do them well, right? And they're not, because what happens is there's not enough people doing the work, and then so it kind of falls on one person. They get overworked, they get burnt out, and then this is kind of the reputation that has kind of built up within housing, and I think that it scares people away.
But it's tough. It's tough.
It is tough. It's a tough. It's because we just lack in housing departments across the country within First Nations, and I think that it's so important for me as the former youth representative to build that capacity through getting the youth excited about the potential that exists within the departments, letting them know what we do, what we need, and just getting them involved in terms of sharing their ideas, because the housing kind of ecosystem that's going to exist in 10 years is not going to look the same as it does now. We don't want it to. We want to be better in 10 years than we are now. And I think that comes from the youth, because those are the ones that are going to carry on that legacy, right? I left my band to come work for FNHPA, and a lot of band or housing departments, they don't have succession planning. They don't know who's going into that role next. They don't know if that person is going to be qualified, right? And that's really FNHPA saying, okay, we're going to have a certification program so that we know the people working in the housing departments have a foundation of knowledge. But also within housing departments themselves, what are you doing to implement a strategy, a succession planning strategy? And you can plan all you want, but if there's no one in 10 years that wants to do the jobs, then no amount of planning is going to help you.
It ain't gonna work.
So you really need to get the youth excited to work for housing departments. It's very, very challenging.
It is.
But
I find
exciting.
I find it to be exciting too, and I also find it that it's becoming the norm now. We're starting to see a lot more youth being involved, a lot more youth being accepted into these plans and planification and figuring out how things work around the native world. So it's funny because I always think of a song by Whitney Houston, who I love so much, and she once sang, "I believe the children are our future," and she wasn't lying, So that's good. Yeah. So moving on, I want to know more about First Nation youth from your perspective. How do First Nation youth play a role in the development of housing within our communities? What can they do?
I think the biggest thing for me is to just not accept the problems. It's I think that when you grow up a certain way, you don't see it, you don't question it, you're just kind of like, okay, this is what housing looks like in our community. And
we just accept it.
Right. And I think that's why getting out of your community is so important.
Eye-opening.
Because it opens your eyes to say, well, why don't we have that? Why don't we have piped water in our communities? I know drinking water is a huge aspect, and it relates to housing, right? But you don't know that that's an option until you see it somewhere else. So I think part of that is the youth going out into the world and questioning things, and saying, why don't we have this? And it's important for them to always question those things, but also to be a little bit angry, to say, we should have these, we deserve these things. And that builds passion, and that lights a fire in the youth, and they want to do better, and they want to be better, and they want to have better for themselves and for their kids.
Because they deserve better.
They deserve better. And I think that that's really where the potential exists for youth within housing is to question the status quo. You hear a lot in our communities, not just within housing, but in other departments as well, is, well, it's always been that way.
Yeah.
And we at FNHPA, part of that was, let's stop accepting that this is just the way that it is here, and let's try to do better in a way that we can build capacity, we can offer resources. And I think that paired with the youth's passion and drive to have more opportunity is really a perfect recipe for people, our future generations, to have more than we did. And that was the whole point of kind of like our ancestors, is they want better for us than they had. So each generation, things are going to get better and better, but people have to stay inspired, and people have to they have to still question it.
Yeah.
Is this the best thing for us? And part of that is when we talk about our communities being very kind of colonial, even in the way that they're set up, right, with the elected band council.
Yeah.
Some people's traditional government is not the elected band council. In my community, we have our traditional Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and we have elected band council, and they're kind of...
So it's like best of both worlds.
You would think so, but they don't work together, which creates conflict. So you have the people that are very traditional and follow the Confederacy, and then you have people that aren't very traditional, either by choice or they just have never, their parents, that was taken away from them and they don't understand it. And so you have people that just follow band council as, okay, this is the accepted way of governing our community. And I don't want to question which is right and which is wrong.
It's tricky.
It is
It's very tricky.
it's complicated, and I am not educated enough on the topic to form an opinion on it, but I do think that it would obviously be better if they could work together for, because the whole intention of, I think, both is the betterment of the community. But I think that there's a lot of talk about colonial systems within our communities, and a lot of people talk about decolonizing. I prefer to call it kind of re-villagization, because we don't want to talk about it in a way of like we're taking something away. We're giving back that traditional way of living, and so the housing, the way that housing looks within our community is going to change, and it should change. And I think that that's returning to our traditional ways, and I think that the youth are really excited about that, and that's what they're really striving for. And I think integrating them into our decision making now is really, really important to get back there and get there quicker.
So I had to Google what are the ages for youth, just to give myself an idea, and I got up to 25 years old. So I do know that FNHPA also offers, I guess you would say, services to even younger children, starting in kindergarten all the way to grade 6. It was mentioned in your bio that you helped assist the resource, which is called Keeper of My Home. Could you give me a little quick rundown of what that learning tool is for the children?
Yeah, so essentially it's age-appropriate content to teach youth, and we actually go up as far as grade 12. Right, and preparing people for independent living outside of, because that's the whole intention of it, is to teach the youth to be respectful of their home, understanding how your home plays into your overall well-being, and as they progress through the program, in terms of as they get older, the resource is really meant to teach them important aspects of their home, like maintaining your home. And when you're a small child, that's as simple as picking up your dirty clothes, or you spill water on the floor, you got to wipe it up. And it goes all the way up to grade 12, where you're trying to teach people what rent is and what a mortgage is and how those things work. And so as part of the task force, and this is headed by the Housing Wellness Program, which is led by Brooke, and she kind of, she's the be all and end all
Yeah.
of keeper of my home. And when I came in as a youth board rep, I really started to question some of the content. And not that it wasn't good content, but the intention of the program was to be facilitated
Yeah.
by teachers. And we found that there's so much more potential for this, not even to be a facilitated program, but to be a self-led program. If a child doesn't have someone there, and we know that a lot of our communities, you know, they lack in their education as well. So there may not be always be someone available to facilitate these. So that the potential of the program isn't taken away by the lack of a facilitator.
Yeah.
So
Like you could still partake in the program
exactly
without having a
so
facilitator.
it's self-led, right? You know, we know a lot of kids have tablets or they have a phone they can
Yeah.
play on. So we're really trying to rework the program to be self-led. And there's a component of it that requires participation from community elders.
Yeah.
So we're looking at getting pre-recorded, you know, elders from all these communities across the country, so that people can still have that aspect of it. The children can still have that aspect in a self-led program.
Yeah.
And so the real intention is to just prepare people to be responsible homeowners, responsible tenants. Children can really appreciate their home. And we hope that by doing these things that parents have a child who likes to pick up after themselves, you know, really appreciates
Start them young.
really appreciates a good home that they do have. And they want to help and they want to do better and they want better in their lives. You know, not all kids live in a safe, comfortable home. And I want them to question these things. You know, I want them to want better for themselves and to see the potential. And I think that's the intention of Keeper of My Home is education, but also to build aspirations within the youth to say, you know, this is what home means to me, and this is what home is going to mean to me in the future, and this is what I want for myself and my children and their children.
I really want to thank you for taking the time to sit here with me and educate me on a lot. You know, and if I'm being here educated, I'm pretty sure our listeners too, you know.
Yeah.
So Lily, I would wish you a great day moving forward and have some Bannock. Here's to FNHPA and the future of First Nation housing.
I love it. Cheers to Bannock.